All right, so we have notes 2.9, vertical and horizontal lines. If you didn't know, vertical means up and down, horizontal means left and right. So example 1, we're going to draw a vertical line, and here's our vertical line here. And what we did was we drew points on the line. So when we draw an ordered pair for a point, it's always x comma y. Well, the x value for here is 4. The y value is 9. And as we went down, our next point was 4, 8. The point below that was 4, 7. The point below that was 4, 6. The point below that was 4, 5. So what are you noticing? Hopefully you noticed that the x value was always 4. Now let's talk about the movement. How did we get from one point to the next? Well, we went up 1 and then right 0. We didn't go right or left. So when we write that as a slope, up 1, right 0, well, this is a special slope name because if you do 1 divided by 0 in your calculator, you'll get an error. And so what happens is if you have a 0 on the bottom of your slope, this means it's an undefined slope. So that's a new special name. So if you see that you're just going up and down, you're not going right or left, that means your slope is considered undefined. So when you write the equation, since x is always 4, we're going to write that as x equals 4. We don't need any y's in this equation because it does not matter what the y is because x is always 4. Even if we have 100 million, like if we go to 100 million on our y-axis, the x is still 4. If we go to negative 100 million on our y-axis, the x is still 4. So example 2, we drew a horizontal line passing through negative 3. And so when we write the ordered pairs, we got negative 9 comma negative 3. Then we had negative 8 comma negative 3. Then we had negative 7 comma negative 3. Then we had negative 6 comma negative 3. So what are you noticing? Well, the y is always negative 3. So the movement here is we go right 1, up 0. So when we write that as a slope, we have 0 over 1. And if you do that in your calculator, well, you actually get a number that is 0. So if you see a 0 on top, this means you have a 0 slope because you can do the math for this fraction. 0 divided by 1 is 0. You can divide 0 by 1, but you cannot divide by a 0. So 0 can't be here when you're dividing. Then you get an error sign. So when we write this equation, since y is always negative 3, we write y is equal to negative 3 because it does not matter, just like before. It doesn't matter what the x is this time because the y is always going to be negative 3. So even if our x is 100 million on this particular line, we're going to have negative 3 for our y. If x is a negative 100 million for this particular orange line, then our y is still going to be negative 3. So now let's look at a table where we have 8s going down on the y side, for example 3. Well, the y is always 8. As we go down on the y side, we have a 0, which is the top of our fraction. As we went down on the x side, we are adding by 1, so that's the 1 at the bottom of my fraction. And since we have a 0 up top, this means we have a 0 slope. And since y is always going to be 8, our equation is y equals 8. It doesn't matter what the x is because no matter what we do, y is 8. Now in this one we have negative 8s for all the x's, so x is negative 8. And when we write the slope or the math for the table, y's are going up by 1, so that's the top of my fraction. X's are going by 0, that's my bottom of a fraction. Can't divide by 0, so we have an undefined slope. And again, since x is negative 8, we write that equation. X equals negative 8. Doesn't matter what the y is, because no matter what we do, x is going to be negative 8. Now we're going to talk about Mr. Slope Man. So let's say we have a graph here where we go up and right. Well, two up and right are both positive things, so that means when we see a graph that goes in this direction, going upwards, we have positive things, so that's Mr. Slope Man's eye here. On the other side, with his eyebrow. On the other side, right? If we go in this direction and we figure out our points, because our graph we read from left to right, well, we go right and down, and a positive and a negative make a negative. So that means any graphs that we see going in this direction are negative slopes, right? These are describing the slope types that we see. That's what Mr. Slopeman's for. Now, lines that went up and down were our undefined slopes, right? That makes Mr. Slopeman's nose, and we can see that here from example 1. Those up and down lines means we don't go right at all, so we would be dividing by 0, and that's why we get, this undefined slope, right here. And then his mouth and his dimples make up our 0 slope. If it goes right and left, we're not going up or down, so we have a 0 on top of our fraction, so we have a 0 slope. And that's Mr. Slopeman. Next up, you're going to do a quizzes game called Identify Slope Types. You will need this page in order to do that. So I hope you guys have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.